In the polished halls of the United Nations, beneath the clink of wineglasses and the lies of smiling diplomats, a storm was quietly brewing. President Ibrahim Traoré, Africa's youngest revolutionary leader, was being cornered not by terrorists or foreign mercenaries this time, but by something colder: betrayal in a suit. As a secret plot unfolds on American soil, one Nigerian politician defies protocol, risks everything, and stands between Traoré and a silent takedown. But why would Peter Obi go against his own president? And when alliances collapse, who do you trust in a room full of enemies? Join courageous voices for a tale of betrayal that will leave you stunned. The marble floor of the United Nations shimmered beneath the flash of cameras as President Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the red carpet, flanked by his interim cabinet. Outside the gates, a crowd of African students, some in dashikis, others in business suits, chanted his name. They didn't see a soldier, they saw a symbol, a man who had defied France, faced down jihadists, and refused to bow to Western economic chains. Inside, the air was cooler, tighter. White men in navy suits whispered behind lanyards, and news anchors rehearsed soundbites like, "Controversial leader of a troubled regime." Traoré smiled anyway, softly, like a man who already knew the knives were coming. 2 floors up, in a soundproof suite overlooking the plaza, Nigerian President Bola Tinubu leaned back in a leather chair, his aides circled like vultures, handing him a sealed folder stamped Multilateral Initiative 12-7. He didn't open it, he already knew what it said. "We'll let him speak," Tinubu muttered, eyes fixed on Traoré's image on a muted screen. "Then we tighten the noose." Behind him, an ECOWAS diplomat cleared his throat. "Sir, if we frame this as a stabilization protocol," Tinubu raised a hand, "it won't be framed, it'll be signed tonight." Downstairs, Traoré's chief advisor, Minister Dwamba, checked his phone and frowned. His invitation to the closed-door strategy session had changed locations without notice. Odd, but not alarming, not yet. As the anthem of Burkina Faso played faintly over the speakers, Traoré placed a hand on his heart, then glanced upward as if sensing the glass walls around him were already closing in. He wasn't walking into a summit, he was walking into a stage built for his fall, and the audience was already seated. What dark secrets are hidden in that folder? Stay with courageous voices to uncover the truth. Peter Obi was halfway through a late-night briefing in his Midtown hotel suite when his encrypted tablet vibrated once, then again. 3 short buzzes. Old code, urgent from Abuja. He opened the message. It was just a line: "They're going to isolate Traoré legally." No name, no greeting, no signature, just the kind of whisper that carried the weight of betrayal. Obi read it twice, then once more. For silence, he turned to his aide, a former intelligence officer turned political strategist who's in New York. From the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, 2 deputy envoys and an ECOWAS liaison. "Why?" Obi's voice lowered. "I think we're being played, and I think Tinubu was not acting alone." Across the East River, in a private suite reserved for Nigeria's elite delegates, a meeting unfolded without cameras. French diplomats, 2 American consultants, and a Nigerian national security advisor leaned over a table stacked with draft resolutions. One file glowed on the screen: Burkina Faso Transition Protocol, Proposal 4. UN oversight. Obi knew what it meant: strip Traoré of his international status, paint him as unstable, justify sanctions, freeze his assets, and if ECOWAS signed first, the rest of the world would follow. The brilliance wasn't in the legality, it was in the optics. No assassins, no tanks, just paperwork. Obi stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker like coded messages. He had warned the party back home: betray Africa's future, and history will remember your silence. But now, silence wasn't an option. The trap wasn't meant for him, but maybe, just maybe, he was the only one who could break it before it snapped shut. The corridor to the East Wing conference hall was eerily quiet, save for the muffled clicks of heels and the soft hum of overhead lights. Traoré's team walked with quiet confidence, unaware they were being ushered not into strategy, but sacrifice. A West African aide opened the door with too wide a smile. "Welcome, Mr. President, they're all waiting for you inside. The long mahogany table gleamed under spotlights. Around it sat representatives from ECOWAS, the UN, and the African Union at the head. Tinubu smiled without warmth, hands folded like a man preparing to read a eulogy. Captain Traoré, he said with diplomatic cheer, we're here as brothers, as builders of peace. Traoré nodded. Cautious, peace doesn't need to be built behind locked doors. A UN legal envoy slid a folder across the table. Its title was Sterile Proposal for Democratic Continuity and Stability in Burkina Faso. Traoré opened it. Inside was a draft resolution, paragraph 5, a joint ECOWAS-UN recommendation for immediate transition of military leadership to civilian authority under international oversight. He blinked, then closed the folder. This is not stability, he said softly, this is surrender. Tinubu leaned in, eyes hard now. It's how responsible nations behave. The world is watching. Traoré's voice didn't rise. Then let them watch me refuse. Around the table, pens clicked, documents shifted. No one made eye contact. A political assassination cloaked in protocol, where the murder weapon was a signature and the body would be sovereignty itself. He stood. If this is your unity, then let history record who chose to sell the continent dressed in suits and silence. No one stopped him as he walked out, because they had already decided he wouldn't walk far. The cameras snapped like distant gunfire as the signing ceremony began, an orchestrated spectacle designed to crown betrayal as diplomacy. Tinubu took the stage first, beaming beside a UN official. Behind him, a row of West African leaders applauded politely, hands moving like clockwork, minds already elsewhere. Then came the flashpoint. A moderator stepped forward, reading from the teleprompter, we now recognize the unity of leadership in West Africa in supporting the peaceful transition in Burkina Faso. The applause returned louder now, but in the center row, Peter Obi remained motionless. No clapping, no smile. Just two hands folded in quiet defiance. The cameras noticed. One CNN anchor whispered, is that Peter Obi? Tinubu did not miss it either. As the final signatures were announced, he turned sharply toward Obi, his voice catching on a laugh too tight to be genuine. Mr. Obi, will you not join us in celebrating peace? Obi rose slowly. His voice was calm, but carved from stone. I celebrate peace, I do not celebrate puppetry. The room tensed. Tinubu's smile faltered. Are you questioning the will of this council? Obi met his gaze without blinking. I'm questioning the will behind the will. Tell me, who elected you to sell Africa's soul to the highest bidder? Silence. A young delegate from Ghana lowered her phone. Stunned, a diplomat from Kenya coughed and turned away. Obi continued, voice steady, the only transition Burkina Faso needs is from colonized economics to sovereign dignity. I won't put my name beneath anything less. And with that, he walked out. No applause followed, only the echo of a question that refused to die. In a quiet corner of Manhattan, a young journalist named Olivia Clark stared at the glowing screen of her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keys. What she had just received wasn't rumor, it was revelation. A source deep within the Nigerian delegation had leaked a memo marked Classified ECOWAS Strategic Alignment Framework. Inside it was crystal clear. President Tinubu had negotiated with two European conglomerates, Vortex Minerals and Elgin Energy, the deal, in exchange for ECOWAS backing a leadership transition in Burkina Faso. Nigeria would grant these firms exclusive rights to lithium extraction across the Sahel corridor, including newly discovered reserves in northern Burkina Faso. Clause 7 was the dagger resource rights guaranteed upon political stabilization under ECOWAS-supported civilian governance. Translation: remove Traoré. Open the minds. Olivia didn't blink. She knew this was career-defining or career-ending. But the weight of it, the smell of exploitation masked as diplomacy, was too heavy to ignore. She hit publish. The story broke on the Continental Report an hour later. The headlines seared across social media like wildfire. Exposed, Tinubu's lithium deal tied to Traoré ouster plan. By dawn, West African activists were calling it the new scramble. Inside the UN building, whispers turned to fury. Delegates stared at their phones in disbelief. Traoré, who had slept with one eye open, read the headline without emotion. He already knew, he just hadn't expected proof. Tinubu's team scrambled, damage control memos flew, the press team denied everything, but the truth had slipped through the cracks and the world now saw the real reason behind the resolution. It wasn't about peace, it was about profit, and Peter Obi. He printed the memo and folded it neatly into his jacket pocket because soon he would need it on stage, in public, in battle. The ballroom at the La Palace Hotel shimmered with wealth and power, gold-trimmed menus, violins floating above whispered conversations, and diplomats laughing into their wineglasses, all the theater of global unity. At the center table, Peter Obi sat between a Brazilian minister and a Moroccan envoy, his face unreadable. The waiter brought the third course. Tinubu raised a toast to African cooperation and economic rebirth. Applause scattered like falling coins. Then Obi rose. No microphone, no announcement. Just the sound of a chair sliding back and a man who had heard enough. He reached into his jacket and unfolded a document. I'd like to read something, he said. Since we're dining on unity, let's not choke on lies. The room stilled. His voice was low, but carried like a blade. Clause 7. Resource rights guaranteed upon political stabilization under ECOWAS-supported civilian governance. Gasps, utensils clinked. A South African ambassador dropped her wineglass. Obi continued, reading the backdoor deals word for word. European mining contracts, timelines, signatures. The room shrank to the sound of truth. Traoré, seated quietly at the far end, didn't blink. He just watched. Tinubu stood suddenly, knocking his chair over. This is slander, he spat, voice cracking. This is a setup. No, Obi replied calmly, this is your signature. And then Tinubu was gone, storming out under the weight of his own shadow. That night, as the memo went viral, the Nigerian embassy's phones rang without pause. Reporters, protesters, even diplomats demanding answers, but the loudest sound wasn't outrage, it was silence, the silence of power exposed, the silence before consequences arrive. It was just past midnight when Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of the Waldorf entrance, expecting the familiar armored SUV and the plainclothes guards who'd trailed him since arrival, but the curb was empty, no vehicle, no escorts. Only the cold hum of New York City and the flicker of a nearby camera lens. At first, he waited 10 seconds, then 30, then he understood. Back inside the hotel, the Nigerian delegation had already begun a quiet operation. Calls to ECOWAS security, justifications filed, budget lines cited. They didn't pull the trigger, they just pulled the shield and left him alone. Civilians passed by, some recognizing him, others oblivious. A tourist snapped a photo. The president of Burkina Faso walking down Park Avenue in military green, coat collar raised against the wind. That photo would go viral before sunrise, but at that moment, it was Peter Obi who acted, watching from his room. He made one call to his private head of security, I don't care what it takes, you protect him now, too. Unmarked sedans intercepted Traoré at 51st Street, doors opened, no explanation, just eyes that said, we were sent by someone who still believes in you. Traoré didn't hesitate, he entered the car. In the rear seat of the following vehicle, Obi gave a quiet nod to his aide. They've made him vulnerable to the world, let's show them what brotherhood really means. No handshake was exchanged, no statement issued, but from that moment on, their bond became something deeper than politics. It was the kind of alliance forged not in ink, but in the spaces where power forgets it still bleeds. The General Assembly Hall was packed to the rafters, delegates shuffled papers, translators adjusted headsets and murmurs buzzed like static as Peter Obi approached the podium. He didn't bring notes, he didn't need them, what he carried instead was the weight of betrayal, of truth, and of a continent tired of being auctioned in backrooms. The hall dimmed, his voice, calm at first, cut through the murmurs like steel through silk. There was a time, he began, when Africa was carved by foreign hands. Now it is being carved again, this time, not with blades, but with business cards. Gasps, silence. He paced slowly, then turned sharply toward the rows of suited leaders. Africa does not need saviors in foreign suits, he declared, voice rising. We need protectors and local boots. We do not need more signatures and air-conditioned betrayal. We need leaders who bleed with their people, not for profit margins, but for dignity. The room shifted, phones stopped, heads turned. In Burkina Faso, a man stood when others sold their voice. You tried to remove him with silence. You failed because truth doesn't need a title, it only needs courage. The camera panned to Tinubu, his lips tight, hands clenched, unmoving. Obi's voice grew thunderous. I will not be part of this second colonization, and if standing alone is the cost of integrity, then let me stand until I fall, but I will not kneel. Then quiet, for a breath. The entire UN held still, and then applause. It started from the African bloc, then Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean. Like rain after drought, Tinubu did not clap. He could not move, because in that moment, the world had stopped seeing him and started seeing what Africa could be. The chamber was colder than usual, stiff with protocol, heavy with the scent of looming decisions. Tinubu sat poised behind his nameplate, flanked by stony-faced Nigerian delegates. The draft resolution sat before him, its title crisp and sterile: Motion for Stabilization and Sanctions, Burkina Faso. He raised his hand. Mr. Chair, we call the vote. Silence spread like spilled ink. Screens lit up across the hall. Nations began to vote, yes, abstain, no. In the African bloc, the room fractured, some pressured by deals, others by conscience. But then came the Caribbean, then Southeast Asia, then the Pacific microstates. One after another, unexpected voices rose in quiet resistance. No, we stand with the sovereignty of Burkina Faso. Peter Obi didn't speak, he only watched, arms folded, as the weight of truth bent diplomacy in real time. And Traoré, he sat in the back corner, calm, unshaken, staring not at the board, but at the future trying to be born through that screen. When the tally ended, the room stilled. The motion had failed, not by a landslide, but by a thread, and sometimes that's all history needs. From the second row, a young Burkinabe diplomat covered her mouth with shaking hands. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks as she stood, trembling but proud. For once, she said aloud, voice cracking, we weren't alone. No one silenced her, no one objected, because the lie had collapsed, and in its place stood something rare, a continent fractured but not broken, daring to imagine itself as one. Tinubu stood slowly, his face unreadable, then left without a word. He came for a vote, but walked away from a reckoning. The streets of Ouagadougou erupted before the sun had fully risen. Walls once bare now bore sweeping murals painted in the dark defiantly. One showed Ibrahim Traoré, fist raised, uniform creased by the Sahel wind. Beside him stood Peter Obi, coat flaring like a banner, eyes fixed forward. Beneath them in bold red strokes, two stood. Millions rose. Vendors paused to take pictures. School children pointed, whispering the names of men they once thought too distant to matter. Taxi radios replayed Obi's UN speech on loop, and in the heart of the capital, a new chant pulsed like thunder. Not for sale, not again. Inside the presidential palace, Traoré removed his jacket and stood in silence before one of the murals. We've changed something, he said softly to his advisor, Minister Douamba. Not everything, but something real. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in Abuja, Peter Obi sat in his office, surrounded by reports, headlines, and maps. A secretary entered, pale and hesitant, holding a sealed envelope. Marked eyes only. He opened it. Inside was a single flash drive and a short typed note. The next one won't be on stage. Watch your flank. He stared at the message. No signature, no insignia, just another shadow slipping toward daylight. Outside his window, the Nigerian flag fluttered. Somewhere below, protesters waved Burkinabe colors beside their own. The battle for truth had won a round, but the war for Africa's soul was far from over. Peter Obi leaned back, exhaled, and whispered to no one in particular, so they're not finished. Good, neither are we, because when warriors return, they don't come back to rest, they come back to prepare. If this story moved you, don't just watch, stand with it. Hit that like button if you believe Africa deserves leaders who protect, not profit. Subscribe for more untold stories of truth, betrayal, and revolution from across the continent on Courageous Voices. Drop a comment below. Who do you think is really fighting for Africa's future? Names only. No filters. Share this video with someone who still believes that silence is strength. Let them see what courage actually looks like. Together we expose. Together we rise.